Hello class, this is Dr. Branch. I'm going to provide you a brief lecture on When Helping Hurts, Chapter 2. So there's a lot I have in this lecture that I'm going to scoot past. I'm going to try to hit the main points, and a couple of big ideas I want you to take away right now are the 4 relationships that this chapter talks about, how those relationships can be distorted, and how reconciliation is required in those 4 relationships. I think this is probably the best idea to come out of the book. And if on the final exam, I'm going to want you to help me understand those 4 relationships, how they can be broken, and how we need reconciliation in all 4 areas. So I'm going to scoot through a few things here. I will say a quick word on the World Bank. They mentioned that some. And here is a picture of the World Bank headquarters building. On the side, they have this huge sign saying "End Poverty," and their stated goal is to end poverty in the world. And what I would suggest to you as Christians, if you understand what I believe is their good intentions, their well-intentioned efforts. Of course, some of the most heinous things ever happened to the world have been in the name of good intentions. If you understand their good intentions, then you understand really the difference that I'm really suggesting to you versus the World Bank. Now, as a Christian, I am concerned about ministry to the materially poor, and I want to do that, and I hope you get a passion for that out of this class and doing it in the right way. But as a Christian, I also believe we are never going to end poverty as humans. That is impossible. That is a utopian goal, and when humans adopt utopian goals like ending poverty, usually what happens is the nation states involved in that become very nasty because they get utilitarian, and anything to achieve that goal is good, and that usually includes coercing other people to come along. It never happens. So what I would say is we can always, a better goal is to say, how can we always improve our ministry to the materially poor? Living in a fallen world, we're never going to end poverty, but we can always do a better job. We can always improve. There's always room to do things better. So until Christ returns, which is going to be the end of poverty, then we're always to be about doing a better job. We haven't found the best way of doing things yet. And some of you might be the person that helps the local church discover better ways of doing these things. We can improve our ministry and be better stewards of what the Lord has for us. So let me just scoot past some of these things about the nations with the greatest debt. And this is also an important point. Your textbook does a great job with this. When you ask poor people how do they perceive themselves, their definition of poverty is very different from the way that those of us who have things view the poor. And so here's what happens. When North Americans, and by that we mean people who have stuff like you and I, we have cars and houses and TVs and all these sort of things. When we talk about poverty, we describe it very differently than the poor themselves who live in these low-income countries. The first thing we talk about is, well, they don't have stuff. They don't have a house. They don't have a car. They don't have a refrigerator or whatever the technological toy may be. But when you ask the poor about poverty, it's a psychological description. They talk in terms of shame, inferiority, powerlessness, humiliation, fear, hopelessness, depression, social isolation, and voicelessness. Here's a great quote from your book. This is from a poor person in Moldova. She said, "For a poor person, everything is terrible. Illness, humiliation, shame. We are cripples. We are afraid of everything. We depend on everyone. No one needs us. We are like garbage that everyone wants to get rid of." So this is a tremendous example of how the difference between the way we view poor people and the way they view themselves. You'll need to know this. So let me scoot on past. Let's talk about the danger of a wrong diagnosis. Your textbook says there's 2 mistakes you can make: treating symptoms instead of the underlying disease, and then misdiagnosing the underlying illness and prescribing the wrong medicine. That said, here's a chart you need to know for the final. It comes directly from your book. And this is a very well done. I like what they do here. If we assume poverty is caused by a lack of knowledge, then we want to go educate them. If we assume that they're being oppressed by powerful people, then we want to work for social justice. If we assume it's the personal sins of the 4, man, we're going to get our 4 spiritual laws tracked, and we're going to witness to them, and we're going to get them in a Bible study, the Alpha study, whatever it may be. If we assume it's lack of material resources, then we're going to give stuff to them. Now, there may be occasions when all four of these are right, and these are the right responses. But if we have misdiagnosed over here on this side, what if actually their real problem is not lack of knowledge, but their real problem is actually their personal sin? Or what if the real problem is not oppression by the powerful people, but it really is a lack of knowledge? So you want to make sure you understand this comparison and contrast. If at least you get this working grid in your mind, it will help you understand how we can at times get things right in our ministry to the poor, but if we have the wrong diagnosis, we're going to have the wrong answer. So this is a very important chart. So let me scoot on and talk about a few things. Poverty in a biblical framework. So there are four foundational relationships for each person. This is going to be on the final. Relationship with God, relationship with yourself, relationship with others, and then a relationship with the rest of creation. Here's a chart from your textbook that tries to diagram this, and they talk about the economic systems that are involved, political systems, social systems, religious systems. There's another chart we're going to see a few slides later that shows how these things can get broken, but these are the four relationships, and really you can experience poverty at all four of these. And what happens sometimes is we omit a poverty of a relationship with God, which is being lost, not knowing Jesus Christ, dying and going to hell. That's the ultimate poverty. But the relationship with God is we can be wealthy when we are redeemed, when we're purchased by the blood of Jesus. Relationship with self, we can be reconciled to God, but still not really appreciate the degree to which we've been justified, sanctified, and are going to be glorified. All these good things that Christ has done for us. Well, so there's different ways we can be poor. As you examine the chart, notice that the arrows connecting the individuals to the systems point both ways. People affect systems and systems affect people. That's a great quote. So the way I act affects a religious system like a local church, but also the way that local church is acting might affect me. The way a social system is set up, the rest of creation. Well, I'm going to interact with that. I'm a player in my culture, so I'm going to have an effect. But if there's systemic evil, if people say that, say racial sin or socioeconomic distaste for people from a particular class is just prevalent in the culture, that's going to affect me. So it works both ways. Here's the goal. The goal is glorifying God. When these relationships are functioning properly, people are able to fulfill their callings of glorifying God by working and supporting themselves and their families with the fruit of that work. So when we work, we glorify God, and it glorifies God when we support our families with the fruit of the labor, assuming we're able to do so. Of course, there's some people with permanent disabilities. That's a different issue. So let's move on. They stress again Colossians 1:16 through 17 and how that God is trying to reconcile things and reconcile all things through Christ. And they emphasize all things again. They did this in chapter 1, and so they say Christ is the creator and sustainer of more than just the material world. He's the creator and sustaining hand that extends to all things. Well, that's right. This sustenance is continuing even in a fallen world. So they're saying Christ is still Lord even though the world is fallen. I agree. This is my Father's world. He's actively engaging the sustaining the economic, social, political, and religious systems in which we live. Well, that's true. But we also need to have some clarification. So here's my word of caution. What I pick up here is something I hear from a lot of young evangelicals now. Well, the world, maybe culture is just morally neutral. Culture just is what it is. It's neither right or wrong. Well, you need to be cautious about saying things like that because the Bible is very clear. We are also at war with the world, and we are told not to love the world. The word world there in the book of John, 1 John chapter 2, verses 14 through 16, I believe it is, 15 through 17, I'm sorry. The word world there meaning organized opposition to God. That's what it means. So it's a system of thought in organized opposition to God. And here's what John 3:19 says. This then is the judgment, Jesus Christ speaking. The light has come into the world, and people love darkness rather than the light because their deeds were evil. Here's what Jesus said, the world cannot hate you, but it does hate me because I testify about it, that its deeds are evil. In fact, John 12:31, the world is ruled by Satan. the ruler of this world. He's called the ruler of this world. So we need to remember this. John 12:46. Jesus says, I've come a light into the world so that everyone who believes in me will not remain in the darkness. They're in dark. Here's what he says in John 15. The world hates you. Understand it hated me first before it hated you. So Romans 1:18. God's wrath is revealed against heaven, against all godlessness and unrighteousness. So we just want to keep in mind, the world suppresses truth. Culture is not neutral. Human culture often wars against God and God's design for humans. So we just want to keep that in mind as we talk about Christ as the reconciliator of all things. Here's what they say. Our basic predisposition toward poor communities, including their people, organizations, institutions, and culture, should include the notion that they are part of the good world that Christ created and is sustaining. And here's what I would say. The dominant theme of the Old Testament and the New Testament is, in fact, the world is organized opposition to God. So I'm not a Gnostic. Gnostics are wrong. We don't believe that matter is evil. The world is good. Everything that God created is good. When he created humans, he said it's very good. But it's also fallen, and in its fallen state, people war against God. We just need to keep that in mind. So we have to hold two truths in tension. Creation was made by God and was good. Humans are very good. We are not Gnostics. But the creation is distorted by historic space-time fall. So how do you apply these four relationships? I want to go to this chart over here and this. So somehow I'm going to try. I want you to know this chart for the final. I'm not sure how it's going to pop up just yet, but there's different forms of poverty. Do you see this? I actually like this chart very much. You can have a poverty of spiritual intimacy for just an atheist. That's poverty. You're denying God's existence. Materialism. Life is all about stuff. Worshiping false gods and spirits. That's idolatry. And that fractures your relationship with God and then ruins all the rest of these relationships. You can have a poverty of stewardship. You think, well, there's no with the rest of creation. You see that? You say, well, there's no sense or purpose. But if you believe life really has a purpose, then there's a reason why you want to steward the resources God has given you. You can go either extreme. You can just be a lazy sluggard and not do anything, or you can become a workaholic. Then there's also a poverty of community. We can get self-centered. It's all about me. To quote Toby Keith, want to talk about me, talk about I, oh, number one, oh, my, me, my. Then we exploit and abuse others, which, by the way, this is my stress on the sin of Israel. Remember that they, first of all, had a poverty of spiritual intimacy with God. They were engaging in syncretism, which led them to have a poverty of community. They were exploiting and abusing others. Then you have a poverty of being. Oh, and this is a great point in the book. I really like this from When Helping Hurts. Rich people get God complexes. We think, oh, we got all this stuff. We're going to go help these poor people, and they need us. And it's almost like we deify ourselves. Even as Christians, we kind of do that. We get God complexes when we go to help the poor. On the other hand, poor people can have an unhealthy, low self-esteem. I don't use that in a psychological way. I mean that in a religious way. If you've been purchased by the blood of Christ, man, you are royalty. You're in the family of God, and so it's a wonderful and a good thing. But if you are materially poor, you have the sense, well, I'm not worth anything. So I want you to know this chart and all these different ways that poverty can occur. I really like this chart. I think it's one of the best ideas to come out of this book. And if we as churches understand that before we go do ministry to the materially poor, it really helps us have a holistic approach to doing ministry. I like charts and graphs, and I like this one a lot. So let me just get past, here's the major premise. One of the major premises of When Helping Hurts is that until we embrace our mutual brokenness, our work with low-income people is likely to do far more harm than good, for which I say, amen. Remember, what they're saying right here goes back to this point on the chart right here. They're stressing this part right here. Both of us are broken. We're all sinners that need to be redeemed. And at this point, I agree with the book very much. So I want you to get these big ideas out of chapter 2. I hope this has been of help to you, and I trust that the Lord will bless you as you continue to study.